I went from this cube in Blender to this fully built out game in the Godot game engine in only 12 hours using the new Fable 5 model. I have zero experience using Blender or the Godot game engine, but in this video, I'm going to walk you through all the steps I took to make it happen. No game studio, no 3D art background, no engine tutorials, just me, plain English, and a whole lot of back and forth with an AI. Let me show you how it actually went down. And thank you Neural4D for sponsoring this video. More on them later. I first asked Opus Fable 5 to build this dragon in Blender using the Blender MCP. If you've been watching my channel, you know how Claude compares to other models on this specific task. It actually did better than Quen this time. If you know, you know. Oh, and if you haven't subscribed yet, you're the reason I can't be a full-time YouTuber. So wipe that eye booger off your face and click the subscribe button. Did you do it? Okay, so where were we? That's right, the dragon image. I handed it to Fable 5, asked it to recreate that dragon in 3D, and told it to go above and beyond and be creative. And then I basically just sat back and watched it work. It built the entire dragon from scratch. The body, the wings, the horns, the glowing eyes, all of it. I wasn't modeling a single thing. Fable 5 was driving Blender directly. It even rendered its own work, critiqued it like an art judge, and fixed its own mistakes before it ever showed me. And look at the results. It's crazy how far it's come since the first time we ran this test. Honestly, it came out so good that this was the exact moment I decided I wanted to build a whole game around this dragon. So I asked Fable 5 to flatten one of the wings, export the dragon as a game-ready character, and stage a dragon dogfight over the ocean. Think fighter jet dogfights, but with dragons throwing fireballs. I gave it the full wish list. Realistic water, realistic fireballs, and big explosions when you shoot something down. A wake trailing in the water when you fly low, wind effects when you go fast, and a real sonic boom when you hit top speed. And ideally, all of it working with an Xbox controller. Now this is where I need to explain NoirStage because it's the tool that makes this whole workflow possible. I started building it for one reason, to make creating Godot games way easier. It lets me control exactly where my 3D assets go on a 3D canvas and drop notes onto specific spots in the world with real coordinates so I can actually communicate with the AI in 3D space. Think Minecraft but for 3D game development. Here's the key thing. AI is incredibly good at building games for the web with Three.js, but it really struggles building directly in Godot. So my move is to stage everything in NoirStage and get it fully working in Three.js first, since that's the easy part for the AI. Only once it's solid in the browser do I have it start porting everything over to Godot. If you want to use it yourself, NoirStage is completely free to download at noirstage.com. I'm still building it out, so it's only going to get better. Alright, back to the dragon. So I got the first version running in the browser and started flying around, and right away I had notes. The very first thing I noticed was the water. It was glitching out and shimmering whenever I looked off into the distance. I figured it was some level of detail thing, but when I told Fable 5, it dug in and found the real cause. The camera was literally cutting the ocean off too early. Once that was fixed and I could actually see, the next thing that bugged me was the wake behind the dragon. It just didn't look real, so I had it rebuild the trail into something that actually widened and foamed out behind me. That looked way better, but then I flew into an enemy and realized the explosions were pretty weak. So we beefed those up with proper shockwaves, embers, and smoke. Then, mid-flight, I noticed my up and down controls were completely inverted, which drove me nuts, so that got fixed next. After that, I went looking for my sonic boom, and there just wasn't one. Turns out it wasn't triggering at all, so we reworked the speed system so holding the throttle actually ramps you up into the boom. And the second that fired, I realized the wind around the dragon looked fake too, so that got rebuilt into proper streaking wind. Every one of these was just me describing the problem like I'm talking to a friend, and Fable 5 going off to research real trusted packages to fix it. But the one that really put it to the test was the sun glare. Whenever I flew toward the sun, the whole screen would blow out completely white and I couldn't see a thing. The first couple of fixes helped a little but didn't actually solve it, so I told it to take screenshots and keep debugging until it was genuinely fixed. And it just went to work. It ran the game, pointed the camera straight at the sun to recreate the problem, and started turning things off one by one to isolate it. It eventually found that the sky itself was way too bright and washing everything out, and it fixed that at the root, which honestly blew me away. The one thing I never got working on the web version was the Xbox controller. We went back and forth on it, but it just would not cooperate in the browser, so at a certain point I made the call to let it go. I already knew it would work fine once we got to Godot, which is what actually mattered, so it wasn't worth burning more time on. At this point, I wanted to add a bunch of bigger features, and the plan was to let Fable 5 build all of it out while I went off to work on the 3D assets. So I gave it a really detailed list. First, I asked for enemy ships floating in the water with giant arrow launchers that fire at me. Then I wanted a red flash on the screen warning me which direction the arrow was coming from, plus about 2 seconds to react and dodge it. If I dodged it, the game should drop into cinematic slow motion and follow the arrow as it flies right past me. And if it hit me, the arrow should actually stick into my dragon and make it harder to fly. On top of that, I asked for a kill cam, so whenever I shoot down an enemy, the camera follows it as it crashes into the sea. I basically described the entire action movie experience I wanted and turned it loose to build it. And while it did that, I went off to handle the dragons and the assets. Now, by this point, I was so invested in making this look like a real AAA game that I made a big decision. I dropped my original Blender dragon. As good as it just wasn't quite AAA ready, and I wanted everything, the dragons, the ships, the arrows, to look top tier. So I decided to generate the assets and rig the dragons using AI instead. First, I went over to GPT and generated some high-quality dragon images. Then I dropped those into this 3D asset generator called Neural 4D, which honestly outputs some of the most realistic models I've ever seen. And the way it works couldn't be simpler. You drop in your image, hit generate, and I set all the settings to high. Quick pro tip here. Set it to high first, and then once it generates, click the retopo option on the left and drop it down to somewhere between 10 and 20,000 faces, which optimizes it for gameplay. I can't stress enough how much Neural 4D helped streamline this game development process. Huge shout out to Neural 4D for sponsoring this video. Go show them some love. Click the link below and use the exclusive code to try it free today. Once I had my dragon, I downloaded the GLB file and dropped it into Noir Stage, which also has a rigging and animation feature I built right in. It supports dragons, spiders, dogs, birds, snakes, and of course humans. I'm not gonna lie though, rigging and animating the dragon took me way too long. I'm pretty sure I messed something up along the way because the wings didn't look totally natural when they flapped. I could always go back and re-rig it, but for the sake of this video, I just kept the rig that took me a solid 40 minutes. Good enough is good enough. I generated 2 dragons total, one for the player and a second one to be the enemy dragons. For the enemy, I rigged it with the bird rig and animation, which was way easier. I somehow managed to mess up the horns so they now flap along with the wings. But other than that one little glitch, I actually really love how that one turned out. Here's another cool part. Neural 4D also offers API keys. So to save myself a ton of time, I just handed Claude a temporary API key and asked it to generate the rest of the assets for me, specifically the enemy ships and the giant arrows that get launched at me. I told it to make sure the arrows were big, with big red feathers on the back so they'd be really easy to spot when I'm getting shot at. And it just went and generated all of them on its own, spinning up a few options for each and picking the best ones. No modeling, no texturing, no back and forth. That saved me an unreal amount of time. Okay, so now the browser version was looking and feeling great, which meant it was finally time for the main event. I told Fable 5, let's build this in Godot now. And NoirStage translated the whole game over, mechanic by mechanic, into the actual Godot engine. Now, when it first built the game in Godot, something interesting happened. The AI absolutely nailed every single mechanic. It all played perfectly, but the visuals, they looked like someone vomited on my computer screen. At first, Fable 5 was trying to hand roll all of the effects itself, and it just looked rough. Flat lighting, fake water, basic shapes for the fire, so I told it to go research the best, most trusted free add-ons out there to seriously bump up the visual quality, and it pulled in a real ocean simulation, a proper sky system, and actual VFX textures for the fire and explosions. From there, getting the exact look I wanted was just a few back and forths with Claude about what needed adjusting. Nothing crazy, just me pointing at whatever looked off and it dialing it in. The difference was night and day. The water was one thing I spent a lot of time on. It went from trying to generate water from scratch, which looked awful. Second attempt at the water was better when I saw the screenshot, but then I opened it and noticed that it looked like a textured piece of rubber floating above waves of water. The third one was the winner for sure. This new add-on had large waves compared to the web version, but Claude mentioned it was adjustable, so we stuck with this one. Then we got into really dialing in the feel of it. The water was way too rough, so the first thing I did was have it calm everything down, and then I had it make the wake kick in sooner, because before I had to fly almost on top of the water just to see it. After that, I wanted the fireballs to actually read as fire, so it made them hotter and more orange and bumped up the size of the explosions while it was at it. I also caught that the dragon was banking the wrong way in its turns, so we flipped that so it leans into them like it should. And the last touch was the animation. I set it so the dragon glides by default and only flaps its wings when I'm actually throttling up. Little stuff, but it's what makes it feel like a real game. Now, I'll be honest about one thing I could not crack. The dragon kept looking kind of flat, with weirdly dark shadows on it, and no matter what I tried, I couldn't figure out what was causing it. I spent a handful of prompts on it and got absolutely nowhere. So if you're a game dev watching this and you know what that flat, dark shadow look comes from, please drop the answer in the comments because it's still bugging me. I was also starting to hit my usage limit with Claude around this point, so I had to make peace with it and move on. And then the last thing that really brought this whole game together was the sound. I had Claude add a full soundtrack and sound effects using ElevenLabs API key. Dramatic, war-style music with a cello, plus wind, wing flaps, explosions, splashes, wood breaking, even the arrow whipping past me. And it wasn't just slapped on either. The sounds get louder or quieter depending on how far away they are, and everything pitches down during slow motion for that cinematic effect. That little detail is what really sold the whole thing. And then I added the cherry on top. I asked that whenever I fly straight at a ship and blow it up at close range, the game drops into slow motion and swings the camera around to frame my dragon charging right through the explosion. And you cannot tell me that this doesn't look cool. Just watch this. I ended up getting both the web version and the Godot version looking pretty much identical. So I'm genuinely curious what you think. Drop a comment and let me know which one looks better to you. By the way, I'm in the middle of having AI make a full-blown horror game, so if you want to watch that, don't forget to like and subscribe. Huge thanks again to Neural4D for sponsoring this video. The link is down below, so go check them out. Here's some gameplay for those who want to watch more. I'll post this on itch.io or something so you guys can play it.